Sorry, when Zoom's being funny, like I'm in the meeting, but not in the meeting. So I'm with Nairi, but we'll get it fixed.
We're ready?
Okay, we're good. Yes, we're live.
Yeah, I'm excited. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It is a few minutes after 12 o'clock. It's 12:03, but we'll go ahead and call the special meeting of the La Cañada Unified School District into session. I would ask Dan, if you don't mind leading us into the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll get started.
Certainly, if you could please place your hand over your heart and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Much appreciated. Welcome, Dr. Bruce. We'll be with you in just a moment. We'll get started. Nairi, do we have any non-agendized public comments?
We only have public comment on agendized items because today's meeting is a special and
Right.
public comments have not been received for that either.
So do we have any agendized items?
Not at this time. Thank you.
No. Okay. So we are set. All right, so we'll move on directly into our first read items. This is the 4A on our agenda. Welcome, everybody. We have as 4A restorative practices and culturally responsive education training provided by Dr. Erin Bruce for the governing board. And I know, Dr. Bruce, you've already provided the training once or twice already, I believe. So welcome. And Wendy, I'm going to pass it on to you. This is an opportunity for us to receive this training and engage in some dialogue. And Wendy, if you'd like to go on with a different kind of introduction, let's go.
I'd just like to thank everybody for being here today. I'm very excited. We met with Dr. Bruce with the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Oversight Committee, had a really powerful training. It was very effective. I'm happy to bring this to our governing board today. And then we look forward to this evening at 6 o'clock. We have a family learning series event with Dr. Bruce. Anais, I know that for the governing board, it probably doesn't need to be a full introduction, but if you could share a few of Dr. Bruce's many credentials with the governing board, and then after that, we'll go ahead with Dr. Bruce.
No problem. Welcome, Dr. Bruce and governing board. Dr. Bruce is one of our subject matter experts who will be guiding our implementation of LCUSD's DEI plan. He will be providing trainings to different groups and stakeholders throughout the year. Dr. Bruce has over 20 years of experience in leading diversity and inclusion initiatives and international programs. He has served as an administrator and a teacher in the US and abroad, and is a certified multicultural diversity trainer. He holds a master's in international business administration from the United States International University and a PhD from the University of Rhode Island. In the past 15 years, Dr. Bruce has served as Director of Multicultural Affairs in Rhode Island's College, Chief Diversity Officer in San Diego State University, and is currently the Vice President, Chief Diversity Officer at the Arts Center College of Design. Dr. Bruce has taught courses and workshops in a variety of topics related to DEI, conducted extensive research abroad, has been a keynote speaker in over a dozen events and universities, is a member of several prestigious associations and organizations, and has received many honors and recognitions. It is with pleasure that I introduce him to you this evening. With no further ado, Dr. Bruce.
Dr. Bruce, forgive me for interrupting. It was a great introduction, Anais. Thank you. But I just want to say, since this morning, I've had some connectivity issues. Dan, if I freeze or log off unexpectedly, would you mind just taking over so we can continue? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I also have to make sure my kids get to school in the morning. So I am speaking from the perspective of a parent of two young ones. One is 9, the other one is 13. And they are probably my greatest accomplishment. So thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time together, so I'm going to jump in and do a quick screen share so we can begin our time together. And we'll definitely have some time towards the end of my presentation for some discussion. Can everyone see that okay? Great. Well, we just did introductions. I want to talk a little bit about student preparation because we really do want all of our students to be prepared for this amazing dynamic world that we live in. And then I'll share a little bit around restorative practice strategies. And we'll cover a little bit around culturally responsive and inclusive curriculum design, just so that you have an understanding of where the district is going with the educators that are involved, but also to get a better understanding of how this is impacting families, how this is impacting students as well as the community, and we'll have some time for Q&A as well. So, as we're going through this conversation together, think about what preparation means to you and what it means to our country and the region. We really do want our students to be prepared for this dynamic world that we live in. We want them to be successful leaders in a highly diverse and globalized workforce. We want them to be prepared to be inclusive team members who respect and understand that different perspectives are important in any team situation. And we really want them to be prepared for life. We want them to be prepared for the top colleges in the country. We want them to be prepared for top positions in the workforce. And we know that that can't happen soon enough. We want them to be ready to go and hit the pavement running. And that requires a lot of academic skill, but it also requires a lot of social skill, and as well as a lot of technical skills. So definitely young people are our most precious resource. There's my kids right there. They're a little bit older now, but as a parent, I realize how important it is to be aligned with the school district and teachers, and making sure that our students are living up to their full potential and being challenged along the way. And as I've spoken with parents whose children are coming back from college for the holidays, or maybe even have spent a year at school, some of them have shared that maybe they thought that their children weren't as prepared as they could have been. They have shared that they've gone off to these universities, or some of them have been online, and some of the conversations and the language that's being used to talk about current events or even just topics related to their major, sometimes in those group discussions, they felt like they were at a disadvantage. They felt like they didn't have the tools or language to talk with their new friends or colleagues or even faculty about some of the changes that are going on in the world. And we don't want them to feel like they have a disadvantage. And sometimes they blame parents. They're like, well, why didn't you teach me about this? Why didn't I know that the world was like this? And why didn't you know? And sometimes parents are doing their best to shelter their children from some of the ills of the world. I can understand that. I don't talk to my children about absolutely everything that goes on, but I do want them to be prepared. And sometimes they're asking, why didn't I learn this? So there definitely is a thirst for knowledge. And as you can imagine, young people have access through their technology, their cell phones or other handheld devices, to more information than we ever had as youngsters. So we have to go into education with that mindset and know that they're definitely plugging into a very different frequency than maybe what we started with. So come with me on a quick journey and just imagine that one of the students who recently is graduating, or in the spring, maybe they're graduated or they're about to graduate, and they're applying to top universities. In fact, gosh, most application deadlines are right around the corner for those of you who have seniors. They're applying to top universities across the country, and they have the opportunity to visit some of these campuses and be interviewed. They're very excited. They've practiced their firm handshake and making eye contact, and maybe they even learned how to tie a bow tie along the way. They think they're ready, and they're touring these campuses. They're encountering diverse populations of students and faculty, maybe different from the schools where they grew up or the communities where they grew up. And the interviewer, they make it to the interview on time. They're prepared with a little portfolio and prepared to talk about their experiences a little bit with some of the interviewers. And interviewers are very impressed. They're like, wow, you went to a top school, you're in a great school district, you've got a 4.0 or even higher GPA in some cases. They're taking AP courses, stellar test scores. They even got some extracurricular activities and some volunteer service. They're very excited about being a top prospect for some of the schools where they're interviewing. And so their profile is really solid. And it really is similar to a lot of the other students that they're interviewing. If you have top test scores, you're going to apply to top schools like every other student in the country. So they're in the interview is going well. And one of the panelists says, I just have one final question for you. We have a diverse campus with students from across the nation and the world. Can we just ask you one more question? Please share some of your experiences and understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how you expect to contribute to our campus community. We want to make sure that students know how to answer that question. And we can groom them to answer that question, but we really want some sincerity and authenticity to be behind that answer. We want them to be able to be excellent and be able to contribute to the diverse world we live in. And that means that there's a little extra effort required because it's a really important new skill that maybe 20 or 30 years ago may not have been even asked in an interview, but I know more employers are asking that interview, and they're actually seeking individuals who have those additional levels of consciousness around the difference and how to engage difference in the world. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind, because although there's a lot of different aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're really talking about leadership development at its core. And what makes a great leader is the ability to engage with difference in an effective manner and have a vision that engages a different type of population. For those of you who aren't familiar, and I'm sure many of you are because you might be living with them, the diversity of the Gen Z population, those young people between the ages of 9 and 25 are digital natives. They're very interested in diversity. In fact, 50% of that population are non-white. They're very engaged with social justice, and they're very engaged with access to information. Because of these handheld devices, they have so much more information, and we want to make sure that we're doing our best to engage them and prepare them for the diverse world we live in. They're plugged in. They're very anxious when they don't have their cell phone in their hand, as many of you know, and they need to check in on a regular basis with their community. And so they all care, or many of them care, about cultural fluency. They want to understand how to engage with the rest of the world, whether it's through music or whether it's through popular culture and television or movies or clothing or just forms of expression. And you'll see that in young people in many schools around the country. They're engaged in exploration of the world, and we want them to have some fluency on how to engage effectively without insulting people or without offending others, as well as seeking safety for themselves along the way and their own expression. They want people to accept them for who they are. And so we want to make sure that they have the tools. We want to make sure that they're able to thrive in this diverse world and be prepared for any encounter that they might experience, whether it's in their own community or whether it's while they're in college or even abroad. So we can all commit to academic excellence. We know that academic excellence is important. And that's something that the entire school district is incredibly committed to and has an amazing track record in that area. But we also want to be able to commit to social excellence. This is a skill set that is absolutely essential to be successful in this incredibly diverse world that we live in. And we know that not every student is graduating or prioritizes social excellence in the same way. Think for a second about a student. They're a top student, they earned a 98 on a quiz, but yet in the same day, they bullied one of their classmates in the hallway later on. Do we consider them a good student? Or the same student makes a sexist remark at a sports event the same afternoon. Is that a good student? Or maybe that same able-bodied student drives their car to school and they park in a space designated for people with a disability. Is that what we think of as a good student? And so on their social media, maybe that evening, they're joking around with their friends about the race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation of a new teacher in the school district. Is that what we perceive to be as a good student? And so many colleges and employers are looking for individuals who are good students. They're looking for someone who is well-rounded socially as well as academically. And as we, as parents and as community leaders and as educators, begin to motivate students, we need to make sure that that social excellence is a priority. And so the format for restorative practices is really a shift in mindset. It's about developing a capacity for all the stakeholders to be able to create spaces for students to develop that sense of social excellence. And we're invested in the culture and the climate of a school. and helping students to accept responsibility for maintaining a safe space, an enjoyable and productive environment for everyone who's involved. So this is really more about a partnership with students, as well as community members, as well as educators, to make sure that students are living to their full potential as healthy and thriving human beings. We're establishing norms that help support inclusion, which is what many excellent teachers already do. We want to make sure that it's in partnership with families as well as community as well. And respect and personal and academic growth are part of that. So what does that look like? Well, it focuses on building and maintaining and restoring positive relationships with one another, peer-to-peer, which I think is an amazing way to develop a sense of culture and shift a culture in a community, but also working with faculty and administrators to help students develop skills to resolve interpersonal conflict when wrongdoing occurs. So think about what good citizenship might mean. Healthy relationships, belonging and interdependence, and having a voice, or a fair process, or structure, support, safety is something that is always prevalent in these restorative practice models, because we want to make sure every student has a sense of safety and wellness, empathy and perspective taking, understanding that, okay, I may not understand your lived experiences or your reality, but I want to learn more. I'm curious, and I want to learn your story. Taking ownership of their community is also a big part of that. Let me go on to the next slide so you can see how it looks. It really addresses and discusses the needs of the school and the community. And it's easy to say, well, on average, this is what most students want, but we really want to make sure every student feels included and engaged and safe. Those are really important values for any community to have. Building healthy relationships between educators and students, reduce and prevent and improve that behavior that could be harmful. We know that students are experiencing higher levels of stress. We know they're consuming a lot of media that is increasing their levels of anxiety, and they're responding in many harmful ways that we want to be proactive in addressing. We don't want to wait until there's an incident in any school before we respond and address the students' needs. Repairing harm and restoring positive relationships. Sometimes when young people are growing up together, and even in our own lives, when we have an argument, maybe some of you had an argument over Thanksgiving with a family member. How do you restore and repair those relationships? Resolving conflicts and holding people accountable to the highest standards of excellence that we really want for everyone. So Ted Wachtell is a leader and he's the founder of the Institute for Restorative Practices. Human beings are happier and more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And so this is really about a shared governance philosophy that we want to make sure that students can weigh in and be part of the change they want to see in the world. Not always easy to achieve that, but we know that students have a very powerful voice and have concerns. And when we bring them to the table, we find that as they can take ownership of the world that they want to see, then they can make healthy decisions with our support. As I mentioned before, these are most precious resource. And I think we all have a moral responsibility to help and create bright futures and model the behaviors that we want students to embrace. Tolerance, inclusiveness, civility, and respect. We want every student to be able to value and embrace those behaviors. That means we as adults have to also do that. We have to show that to them sometimes so that they understand what that really means. And it could be something as simple as, hey, I saw a piece of paper on the floor in the hallway and I picked it up because that's the good citizen thing to do, versus I'm going to wait for a custodian or someone from physical services to kind of, sweep the floor. So having them modeling that behavior is a great way to help them take ownership of their community. And a part of that is supposed to help with their social and emotional health in learning. So the more that they're part of this community, the greater opportunities there are for them to learn, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. The positive relationships and interactions with their peers and healthy environments foster an opportunity for students and staff and families to learn and grow together. So what I'll be talking about with some of the educators is about what is the relevance of that educator within the school, and how do educators become champions for this this change that we want to see, and how they position themselves in the classroom, how they reflect upon their own lived experiences, how does that impact their curriculum, how does it impact how students are receiving information and feel engaged in the classroom, and also how's it preparing them for the rest of the world. The ways in which we as educators impact our view the world have an incredible impact on students as well as ourselves. So I know you might be interested in some of the nuts and bolts related to this. Like why are we doing this? What are some of the benefits? Well, we're really building relationships at its core. Just like you should build a relationship with your neighbors, right? I mean, it takes a little effort. It takes some time. It takes some respect, you know, especially when they might be having a party the weekend, you know, next weekend or something like that. There's a give and a take, but it really is about striving to be respectful for everyone and providing opportunity for equitable dialogue and decision-making. It involves all the stakeholders, and it addresses harms and the needs and the obligations that we have. You know, if we don't want students to be harmed in any way at all, it can be detrimental to their growth and how they engage in relationships as adults. So we do need to be mindful of that. And it really, at its core, it's encouraging everyone to take responsibility for the community and the learning experience. So there are a few steps to changing the climate, and it's being intentional about it. It's starting with those shared values that we want every student to help contribute to. And many faculty do this already. It's really formalizing it in a way so they understand, okay, why do we have kind of codes or of conduct or values within the classroom setting? It's to kind of maintain a healthy learning environment for everyone. And so it's important to emphasize that and allow students to weigh in and what other values they'd like to add to that. Making participation in the community is a requirement. So it's not optional to participate in a restorative community. It really is about everyone feeling like they're included and participating as fully as they can. And they should do their best to practice that, right? And we should do our best to help enforce that. And they can help enforce in a variety of different ways, peer-to-peer, and helping de-escalate any types of conflicts or inappropriate conduct when it might occur, and commit to engage. So there's a commitment that we would hope that students would make to engage in healthy dialogue to build relationships. Some of us struggle with relationships with people we care about sometimes. We have to make a commitment to have a conversation and be respectful, to listen and seek to understand and then be understood. And if we've harmed someone in the community, then we try to make it right. Modeling, I talked about before, you know, teach those community values and reinforce them. We assume sometimes that students in high schools already have a mastery of some of these skills related to how to treat their classmates or colleagues. We need to make sure that they're still doing that and modeling that and practicing that behavior. And it doesn't hurt to highlight and reward excellent behavior as well. Sometimes we're more focused on the penalties and the penalizing of students, but we also want to highlight outstanding citizenship and what that looks like. And also explaining what the reason for some of that is. It's good to be a good human, but it's also valuable in their career and developing a successful portfolio of lived experiences along the way. We want them to be able to talk comfortably with interviewers or with classmates or colleagues that they meet along the way, or even with other faculty as they're developing a sense of self. And that's part of the challenge sometimes is getting students to make that commitment and understanding what that means. Participating in a restorative circle, for example, and saying, okay, well, I'm going to listen to what other people's perspectives are and I'm going to share mine. Very important. So just to give you an overview, there are several different types of restorative justice or restorative practices. Restorative justice is more righting a wrong that's committed, and repairing the harm done. I talked a little bit about that before. You're placing value on the relationship. And then you have community conferencing, which what some teachers do, they will say, okay, you know what, I'm going to check in with everyone at the beginning of a class to make sure that everyone's on the same page and see if anyone's in a bad place. But really helping students understand that we're all here to help in that process. It has a lot more to do with community building and not necessarily always focusing on the individual, but making sure that all ships rise. We want all students to be successful. So that means to look out for your neighbor sometimes. And sometimes we do that. It could be something as simple as, hey, you know what, my neighbor was out of town. So, they left the recycling bin at the curb. I'm just gonna, move it off the curb for them. Not a big deal, but about building community service. And many students do that. And I think there's a lot of different ways to engage in community service, not as a punitive action, but as a teachable moment, as an opportunity to engage in service, perhaps with different communities. Peer juries, which is more sometimes used on the collegiate level, but it's also used in many high schools, where students get to understand the overall impact of one's actions and weigh in on how it's affected them, or even making suggestions as to how that harm can be addressed. Some people might call it an apology of action, where a student has committed some negative experience or infraction in the school, and you could just expel them, but then they just get to stay home and play video games. So what are the other opportunities to address the negative actions and hopefully make it right and build a better community along the way and create teachable opportunities that can make a difference? The circle process, it has, it's an opportunity for people to speak and listen to one another in a safe environment and allow people to be heard. We know that there's been a high level of social isolation, and even students who know each other, they're holding onto these handheld devices and they may text people, but not really have a healthy conversation. And we want to make sure that they're able to do that, to discuss in a scholarly manner, in a civil manner, a lot of the concerns that they have, and getting a better understanding of different topics versus a soundbite. Because, as much as I'd love to say, when I have a conflict with someone, I'm just going to unfriend them or block them on my social media, that may not always be the best solution for an outstanding student leader. Preventative and post-conflict resolution programs. How do you heal a community? How do you provide students an opportunity to problem solve and develop self-control skills? It's very easy, especially when hormones are racing, for students to act out in a particular way. We want to make sure that they have some skills to de-escalate situations and manage conflicts. And they're amazing ambassadors in that fashion. They sometimes can help things de-escalate before they even arrive to the attention of faculty or administrators. Peer mediation, recognizing that you can utilize students and conflict resolution is so important. We really want peace in schools, right? We want peace in our communities. What's nice is that by providing a foundation of restorative practices for students, it means that they're going to take those skills with them into adulthood. They're going to be able to have healthy conversations with people who have different opinions from them, and many of them do. But what we're doing is we're reinforcing the value of this in a way that is healthy, and it gives them more opportunities to apply some of those skills. Informal restorative practices using effective statements, which communicate people's feelings. Like, I felt that your actions in class today were disruptive. And there are other students in the class who might have felt that as well. It's giving them an opportunity to reflect on their behaviors and how it impacts the community. And really, that's really talking more about empathy. How do you teach students to be empathetic? And how do we practice that in our own homes to be empathetic and understanding that there's an impact for our actions and the actions of other people in the world? Community service, I talked about a little bit before, restoring that harm or building that community. So here's some of those questions, that people ask. If a student commits an infraction of some sort, you might ask them, about their challenging behavior. What happened? What were you thinking? Sometimes students will do things and then you ask them what they were thinking. They're like, I don't know, I wasn't thinking, I'm sorry, and they're actually remorseful immediately because something happened. They were triggered by something somehow. Who's been affected by what you've done, and how were they affected by it? So giving students an opportunity to process some of the impacts of their actions is so important. It's really creating a space for the people affected as well as the offender, right? And so sometimes those are not necessarily what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, oh, well, if there's a fight, then, or a physical altercation, this is the process that would be used, but it could be something that was said. And sometimes things that are said, even though that adage of sticks and stones and names will never hurt me, the names hurt, and they do have a lasting impact on young people and their development and their ability to engage academically as well as socially. So it's important to create these spaces to restore relationships, but also rebuild and heal a community that might have been affected by something that was said or done. And so to help those affected, you're asking them, what did you think when you realized what happened? What was the impact that it had on you and maybe others? And what was the hardest thing for you related to this? Giving students a space to talk about these things, because sometimes we don't know. As parents, we may not know, unless we have a very open dialogue with our children. Members of the community may not know. Sometimes students are just like posting things on social media and we don't even know they have an account, right? So it's important that we weigh in and create spaces for students to communicate and to deconstruct these experiences, but also be part of the solution. Like, what do you think should happen right now related to? They might say, well, I think the student should do this, and I think their apology of action could be this. And that's really helpful in restoring a community. So some of the best restorative practices in the classroom are active listening, effective communication, like I talked about before, about using I as a way to talk about a particular subject. I feel before I pass judgment on anyone or even think about passing judgment. And curiosity questions, like I just modeled for you, like, well, how did that make you feel? Or what do you think should be done? Or I'm curious to learn more about why you were feeling that way. We obviously don't want to trigger people who've been the victim, but we want to create a space that is beneficial to everyone in the community, where people can begin to restore whatever pain that they might have experienced from any incident. So there's several spheres of influence, and this is where it's great to have a board involved, because many of you are incredibly influential in the community. And so we there's the classroom space, there's the campus space, which is outside of the classroom, which is like, athletic fields or hallways or other spaces on a campus. And then there's also community, right? And we're all members of the community. And, so you think about the person, the place, the practice, and the plan, and how the community can influence outstanding citizenship, outstanding leadership development in a way that's productive and beneficial to not only the immediate community, but the region, the state, the country. We really want to make sure that our students are developing some skills. So the way to kind of think about it is, the person, place, practice, and plan, and the ways that an individual person, because that's really where it starts. How can I as a person influence schools or the community, and how those relationships evolve, the place, and thinking about the environment and the conditions and the factors and the ways we interact with one another. And so some of you, and it's important just to pause for a second and think about, okay, well, who are we talking about? What type of people are we talking about? Or who are we talking about in the environment? Sometimes when I'm wearing like a diversity hat, people will automatically default to, oh, well, he's talking about race. Well, I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about physical ability or disability. I'm talking about age. I'm talking about sexual orientation. I'm talking about religion. I'm talking about gender identity. So as we're thinking about that, in addition to race, there are a variety of ways that people are impacted in a community. So as we think about the conditions that we create in a learning environment, are we being inclusive, and are we being receptive to all of those different lived experiences and identities in a way that's productive for our entire community? The practice, how do we prevent conflict and some of those challenges that may emerge and create chances for relationship growth? And then the plan, we've been talking about a plan and it's being implemented, which is wonderful. How do we make it part of the school culture so students kind of understand, okay, yeah, we've created brave spaces to have conversations around these topics because it's going to help me prepare to be a better leader. It's going to help me prepare to be a better college student, as well as maybe an entrepreneur or an inventor or whatever they choose to do in life. So let's just start with the classroom. How do I, as an educator, interact with my students? How do I interact with my colleagues? And so those are important questions to ask. And if I see a conflict arising, how do I respond? Because that can be a huge challenge. It's like, okay, I understand classroom management. And my first inclination is go to the guidance office. Don't disrupt my classroom. Well, that's not productive because it's not always productive. Because the second that student leaves the classroom, they're not learning, right? They're out somewhere else in the hallway, hopefully making it to the guidance office. And so we're trying to figure out, how do students in that classroom respond when those situations emerge? The place, how do I help students to feel welcome in the classroom? Even the structure of the classroom itself, is one student looking at the back of someone's head most of the day, or is the classroom structure in a circle? And so those are some of the theoretical things that people think about in the environment, but it's also the practice, right? How do we resolve conflicts? How do students help develop that process of resolving a conflict? And then the prevention plan. How do we work as a team within a school to address a disagreement that emerges so that we're all kind of on the same page, which is a huge part of it? Because you might have some teachers who have one philosophy on how to engage around diverse topics, and then another teacher might think something else. If we're on the same page related to that, we're more likely to come out with the most optimal outcome. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything, but at least we understand that we're supportive of each other's perspective, that, okay, students first. We want to make sure that students are healthy and supported and respected. And I guess that includes teachers and faculty as well. We want to make sure that our teachers and our administrators are respected and have a healthy work environment. Joe, you had your hand up. I just saw that. Hi, how are you?
Hey, hi. Thanks, Doctor. Question is, this is an area that's really, I think, high on my radar in terms of our efforts. And you talked about how do we equip our teachers with the toolkits, right? They know they want to, because you said, what is the process? So it's the what, and you're defining we need to have it and try to be consistent. But are there techniques underneath there? Maybe we get to that a little bit, or maybe we need to build some separate pieces. That's what I hear is, help me actually, maybe there's some scenario, a role playing where they can practice how to diffuse something, or to allow people to step back and talk about it in a constructive way. Because we've had some things happen in our schools of a few years where things have happened in class and teachers freeze, and that complicates it, right? And so, just a thought.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to think about it. I don't think there's a magic bullet necessarily, but I think there's a variety of things that you might even call an empathy toolkit that they know they can go to and say, okay, if this happens, this is how I respond. But the other piece to that puzzle is, how does the community respond so that students don't freeze? Because sometimes teachers are present, sometimes teachers aren't present. And we want to make sure that the entire community, students, as well as maybe custodial staff, have some skills to address some of those unique challenges that emerge, to address whatever norms we think are appropriate for a community. And sometimes those norms are created with students and not for students. I mean, obviously, as administrators, we weigh in and we say, okay, here's things that are a deal breaker. But there's other things that students will talk about and say, well, could we have this? Like if someone is generally disruptive in a classroom, like they're getting up every few minutes to sharpen their pencil, which is like an ancient thing that used to happen, right? But, that's disruptive. Okay, well, what does the class do about that? Does the class have a particular signal that says, bring it back? And then the student knows that they've interrupted the class and it's not disrupting the lesson. There's little tricks, and people can call them little tricks, but it really is about more classroom management strategies. When it comes to pain points, most teachers are focused on, look, I got to get through this chapter. So don't disrupt what I'm doing. We have a mission to complete this chapter as quickly as possible. And so do they feel comfortable pausing to address whatever that topic is and just saying, hey, you know what, we'll have to pick up the chapter in the next class, but this is important and we have to address it. Students appreciate that, because what's interesting is that distraction, whatever it might be, deters learning. So it's more about helping teachers to become confident in putting on the brakes for a second and saying, okay, how do we feel about that right now? And as easy as that sounds, practice, like you're saying, that role playing does make it a little bit easier. At the same time, having that peer support, other faculty to be able to say, well, this is what I do in my class. Promising practices that can be used across the district where people say, hey, I've been doing this a while, and when that happens, this is what I do. Or they might say something and we say, well, that's probably not the best thing to do because you're outing that student in front of their entire class. Maybe you should wait until after class. So it is about developing that skill set over time. I don't think it takes a lot of time to do it. And that peer-to-peer mentoring or relationship amongst faculty tends to help them develop their pedagogy much faster. So you're absolutely right. There is some isolation associated with that. As we talk with more teachers, yes, those things will flesh itself out. In fact, I think in January, we're doing a session, January 4th, I think is our first session for faculty, where we'll be digging a little bit deeper into some of those topics. And it's interesting because there's some faculty who know this right as rain. They're like, yes, I already do this. And there's others who are kind of like, I don't necessarily feel comfortable. Okay, well, how do we get them to a point where they feel comfortable? And what does that look like? And how can we help as colleagues, as students, as community members, as family members, as parents, so that students kind of know, it's like, hey, if you see something, say something. That's kind of the mantra that's been going around for a while. If a student feels confident enough to say, hey, you know what, that's not the right thing to say about women, whether they're here or not, that's not the right thing to say about women. Okay, then we're developing good citizens. But they may not get that support from home. They may not get it from the community. We really need, as a community, to emphasize what good citizenship looks like. And through that process, teachers will feel more confident in saying, okay, the community has my back, parents have my back, I'm not operating in isolation. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're going through this process. But you're spot on with saying, it's like, yeah, they want the tools. Everybody wants the nuts and bolts. Today, I'm sharing some of the philosophy and a few ideas about it, but it's not a deep dive at all. So let me kind of see, here's one that you might find valuable: culturally relevant and culturally responsive pedagogy. Do students see themselves and their identities reflected in the classroom? That's more culturally relevant. The voices of those who may not even be in the room is sometimes really valuable. And many teachers do this. Some teachers do it to a point and then struggle with certain topics. Like they might have aspects of certain communities that are addressed, but then they haven't explored the spectrum of identities within that community. And so it really is an opportunity to question and reevaluate your curriculum a little bit and say, okay, well, could I add more? Could I do more? Yeah, let me work with a buddy and see if there's things that they can troubleshoot for my class and I can help troubleshoot for their class to make all classes stronger. Culturally responsive is really looking at the student and validating the way they culturally display learning. For example, there might be an assignment that a student chooses to express in a poem or in a song or actually is in a piece of artwork. Do we create space in the learning environment for that? And do we include instructional practices that allow students to shine through their lived experiences or through their view of the world? Sometimes we don't see those weaknesses in our syllabus. We just don't. Because we're operating from what we know and not necessarily what we think students know, or it's a really interesting dance that takes place sometimes. But what I've found as an educator is that working with students to develop parts of the curriculum can be really valuable. So at the bottom, you'll see where it says centering. You have a classroom and some students feel like they're on the margins of that learning experience. They just don't see anything that reflects their identity. And that's some of those pain points that students feel. And when students question a teacher on it, teachers are kind of caught off guard and like, well, that's not for this class. Let's go to the next page. And students feel like, well, do you value my identity in the classroom? Do you value me as a human being? By centering students in those conversations, we're more likely to come away with an optimal learning experience that actually benefits all students. So that's like inclusive practice in the classroom. So this kind of goes to what Joe was talking about. It's understanding the student's background and then finding common ground, and then moving together to higher ground so that all students and all ships can rise. Teach in ways that have an impact on students, and use diverse students and their cultural backgrounds as an asset to the learning experience. I mean, not every student has the same living experience. Some students have two moms. Okay, well, I'm not necessarily saying that that should be the perfect example that you should use, but what does it mean to actually build in curriculum that includes the diverse family structures that we have? And so those things validate students and help them feel a part of the learning experience. And doing that consistency gives them a sense of belonging. It helps them feel valued. It helps them feel loved. And it really is more about authentic relationships with students. And we know that students who feel like teachers care tend to perform at a much higher level than teachers are just kind of like, well, I care about the top tier students. I'm not interested in the rest of the students. And it's like, no, you need to make sure all students feel like they're part of that learning experience. Valuing their perspectives and identities is so important. Although, maybe when I was in high school, that wasn't a priority. I question what my learning experience would have been like had teachers valued my perspective and identity in the learning space, and how it would have shaped my life. And this really does connect to Common Core standards. It's not like you're deviating from that. It's just developing instructional strategies that help all students to excel. How do we take what we know about these students and value it to help them thrive and learn? We sometimes don't know enough about the students we're teaching, and this is an opportunity to create spaces to learn more about students and what some of their hopes and dreams are, or fears. Although that some of these underrepresented students are not a monolith, they do have some common themes that emerge, and it's important to be able to explore the beauty of those cultures and communities. And even if they're not in the classroom, Native American or Indigenous communities and culture are very much a part of the history of California. How much do we dedicate to that to understand that, yes, these are alive and thriving communities that still exist, but we think about it as something being historic and in the past without understanding that they're very much part of the fabric of our country. A shift in believing in all students. I think that's one of the things that's really important to understand, is that we do need to believe that all students have the ability to thrive, and creating those environments where all students have an opportunity to be successful is very much a part of this. And their emotional wellness as well as their academic wellness are part of that. And that means that we kind of need to unlearn what we've learned about BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's important to create frameworks where all students feel like they're safe and aligned with allies that are going to support them in their journey. One of the easy things to do, Joe, that we were just talking about is, what does diversity and inclusion look like on a syllabus? Is there a statement that sets the tone for a course that helps alleviate some of the pain points that exist in a classroom or in a learning environment? And then what is the teacher doing? They're saying, wait, let's pause for a second. Let me remind you, we've created an environment where all thoughts and experiences and perspectives are honored, and those identities are valuable in our learning experience. It's that reminder that we've created a space together, and these are the values that exist in this classroom. We talked about it at the beginning of the year. In fact, I wrote a statement and read a statement to you. Let's continue to move forward with those same values. And sometimes that's all they need, is that reminder. It's like, yeah, okay, so meet me after class and we can talk a little bit more about that. What's your apology of action associated with that? Okay, well, I'm going to try to, do better, and maybe I can write a short essay on whatever topic. And that's what I do with my own kids. If they say something or do something that's inappropriate, I'm like, okay, well, what's the apology of action? It's not just a punishment. No television, no, you're grounded. There's some apology of action associated with that incident, because I want them to learn and grow. And then campus and community. I talked a little bit about this. How am I making sure a student feels welcome, or how am I making sure even faculty, new teachers feel welcome, or parents feel welcome, or any caregiver. How do they feel that this particular environment is responding to them and their identity? Do they feel like I've walked on some of the campuses in the school district, and people are very welcoming. And I don't know if it's just the bow tie that makes people want to welcome me, or is it a real community of welcoming, like, oh, are you lost? Let me help you go to where you need to go. But I think that extra moment is really important sometimes, especially when we're caught up in whatever we're doing administratively. Parents engage us at sometimes the worst times. I understand what that means. It's like, wait, I'm trying to go here and you're pulling me there. What does it mean to rethink what that encounter should look like so it's the optimal experience? Some of us are just good at it because we're great people and we have great personalities that match up, and others, we kind of get caught off guard when we're challenged. How do we manage those situations, which is another role-playing opportunity? If a parent has questions because their most precious resource has been with this space all day, how do we address that in the most thoughtful manner? And that might require a little rehearsal. Campus and community, and that includes everything from, if a student is using a wheelchair, how are we accommodating them in the classroom or in the library? Are there other things that we should do to be mindful of how they're perceiving our environment or our community? What are some of our social behaviors that are in place, and how can we create some social behaviors that just acknowledge the different experiences that members of our community have, to make it not just an accessible and accommodating experience, but making it a place where all students have a sense of belonging, where they can thrive. So I'm going to pause there because I know we want to have a conversation, but think back to how I started. Are students prepared? Do we feel like we're doing enough to prepare them? Academically, you're spot on, but there's an additional layer that more employers, more community members, more colleges are paying attention to, and it's related to what you could define as good citizenship. How are we raising people who are thoughtful members of society and thoughtful stewards of the work that we have invested in them? So I'll stop there so I can see all your faces. Dan, I think I just saw your hand up. Go ahead and jump in.
Thank you. Excellent presentation so far. Greatly appreciate it. Have a question about restorative. And I think your slide on restorative talked about restorative practices are after conflict or wrongdoing. And a question sort of, it seems like we also need practices that are not just in place after there's been a wrongdoing to restore things. And I'm not even sure restoring is always what we want to accomplish, because it may be that the relationship before whatever happened was not good anyway. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's restorative practices are more a mindset and a shift in how we respond to conflict when we see it. And it's really giving students and everyone in our community the tools to be able to address that and understand that, okay, we're on the same page in how to respond. But I think there's a lot of things that could be done to create a more inclusive learning experience that are proactive. It's like, oh, okay, that idea of, and inclusion is a great word, right? So more teachers are framing what we're talking about as inclusive curriculum design or inclusive educational practices or inclusive pedagogy, where as they're developing a course, they're providing material that would hopefully touch the minds and hearts of all students in a way that helps them to thrive. Doesn't mean that the same identity or profile is at the center of the conversation. It shifts from time to time, and there's room for that. And we're intentional about creating that room to kind of shift. I think some people get wrapped up in a historical narrative and trying to explain past conflicts that have taken place. And I understand the value of that. But we don't want students to feel bad about history. we want them to be informed. And what we've noticed in our country in education is that some students are not informed. They're just not. And we as adults, many times, are just not informed. We got what we got from our teachers, and they did the best they could. And they told us that Columbus discovered America. And that was the narrative when we were kids. There's a little bit of a different narrative now that presents different perspectives of history. And so our responsibility is that when we know better, we do better, and that we create opportunities for people to learn and have conversations around these topics. So I think what you're asking is an important point. Restorative practices are one tool to create outstanding leaders. It's not the only thing we should do. I think a lot more of it has to do with how teachers take ownership of the learning experience in partnership with families and community members to understand that, okay, all of these things have value and benefit students in the long run as leaders, as outstanding students, as contributors to society. And that comes in different ways. Does it mean it's going to change their political affiliation? Not necessarily. Does it mean it's going to change their religion? No, I don't think one thing that happens to them is going to shift the core family values that a parent instills in them. College does a pretty good job of giving them room to explore. But I think it's important for us to give them some of those tools to develop a sense of critical thinking and how to engage with difference. And that tends to be a lot of the proactive stuff. It's the critical thinking and understanding that, okay, civility is important. Having a healthy dialogue without shouting at someone or using foul language or using physical altercation as a way to get your point across is something that some students, even at the college level, and many adults have not mastered. And we see that in the media on a regular basis with a lot of the conflicts that have taken place over the past couple of years. The earlier we give students those tools, the better off we are as adults. But what's interesting is that they bring those tools home and they say, listen, let's listen to my little brother or sister before we jump in and pass judgment. Let's hear and let's hear the conversation and let's hear their perspective. That's probably the most profound change that I see with some young people is that just like maybe they were recycling in their schools before we were recycling at home, and they bring recycling home and they're like, hey, this is why we recycle and we should separate our garbage. And you're like, well, where'd you learn that? I learned it at school. It's good for us as a community member to do it. So I think about some of the framework that we're hoping that young people adopt is part of helping them be healthy members of a community versus just seeing garbage on the ground and just walking by, or hearing someone say something that is absolutely inappropriate and not addressing it. So that's kind of how I think about it. And so that mindset is a little bit different than just saying, I present information, that's all I do. We're really, as educators, as family members, we're developing outstanding human beings that are thoughtful and empathetic and also academically just successful. But we want them to be able to engage in so many unexpected experiences and be thoughtful about how they're engaging. Other questions? Josh, I see your hand up. Hi.
You know, Dan, it's funny. I had the same response that you did in a way that is. I understand restorative justice because you're restoring a wrong, but
Right.
but when we're talking about restorative practices and particularly what you've presented, it doesn't feel restorative. The word means you're restoring something, but what we're talking about is not really restoring necessarily. I mean, there are obviously techniques to restore things when they go when there is an issue, but we're really talking about our techniques to facilitate better classroom conversation in general, a better environment in the school. So I feel like, you know, we are a district and I think a board that really, we care about the terminology we use and we're held accountable for the terminology we use. And so I'm interested in sort of this use of the term restorative. In some of this, it doesn't feel like it's necessarily restorative as much as it is about being good classroom citizens, I guess, or school citizens, and so I guess I don't know what the question is, because I'm sort of, it's all happening all at once for me as I'm figuring it out, hearing you and sort of understanding this, but it feels like, where does that, I guess I'm wondering where the term restorative comes from. I understand restorative justice completely,
Right. Yeah.
but restorative practices in general, I'm just wondering about.
Yeah. And, I think you're absolutely right, Josh. It's well, quite frankly, it's a less threatening term, right? It seems less threatening than, I don't know, diversity and inclusion, which is, can be charged for some people and make them uncomfortable. So, I think there's, and when I talk to teachers about it, they're like, oh, this is classroom management kind of stuff, right? This is, or citizenship stuff. And I think over time, over history, these labels that we put on what I would call good teaching, right? I mean, that's really what it is. Or inclusive teaching, the labels have shifted. The spirit behind them is everyone should have an opportunity to thrive and everyone should be respected. And another way that actually I position it is leadership development, which is something that most people don't argue with. It's like, oh yeah, I want my kid to be a good leader. What does that mean? Well, it means that we really want you to be able to engage in difference and a civil discourse, right? As a leader, you should be able to have a conversation with your team or be a member of a team and respect the positions of other people. I think that's been lost in the fabric of our country in many ways. And so as educators, how do we restore that? There's a program called The Leader in Me, which is really based off 7 practices of highly effective people, right? And it starts out, okay, seek to understand and then be understood, which is another way to kind of frame it. It's a Covey kind of thing that some of you might have participated in at some point, but it's being used as a model in different school districts to really help develop good citizens. All right, if you're going to seek to understand and then be understood, that means you need to understand who you're engaging, right? You need to listen to them, regardless of their identity, regardless of how they look, regardless of whether they have multiple piercings. Can I listen to them and understand where they're coming from? I think it's more some of us as adults that are kind of hung up on that than young people. They tend to be a little more open just because they have access to so much more diversity than we did as kids. So I think you're right. And maybe there's a particular brand or a name that the school district wants to hang their hat on related to this and saying, hey, we're going to call it, good citizens of La Cañada, if that's what you're calling it. Some of the principals have talked about building that label around their mascot or whatever they think they want the standards of excellence for the student body to have, even though some of the mascots might be more hyper masculine and sports oriented than just a general type of image. But I think it's really up to the schools and even the students to kind of figure out what kind of label do we want to put on this, knowing that, okay, some of the framework comes from these models that are established. I think, who is next? Katsier. Hi, you're on mute. And then
Hi,
Dan.
this is great, sir. Thank you, Dr. Bruce. Josh and Dan, you brought up a good point. I keep hearing components of the citizenship that we've all talked about. And I remember my children and teachers discussing with my children who were gone from the district at this point. But I think what's really important is not so much that we're looking to restore, but really looking at what we can do to maintain and continue the type of student representatives, and we mentioned leaders, but leadership in all aspects, not just leadership of a particular area. I think classroom management for teachers is extremely important, but our teachers are phenomenal. I do think that whatever we can share information, strategies, etc., to maintain that type of relationship, the respect, mutual respect, the continuity of the positive behavior, I think is extremely important. So that is what I really appreciate hearing. And I don't want us to get too stuck on the terminology so that we're not going, okay, wait, are we restoring or are we maintaining and continuing? So I want to make sure that we look at it from that perspective. And I'm glad both of you brought that up. I do like the comment you made about the fact that as we're learning about history, that we don't have our students feeling bad, but that to learn, to understand, to gain knowledge, and then to move forward. and then to look and see where we all fit in the bigger picture. So I think those are great ways to be able to, at least that's how I'm seeing it. Dan, I know you had a comment as well.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I agree with both of you that whatever term we use doesn't really matter. What really matters is what's being taught and what's going on the backside. I guess my concern is just that I don't really understand the term restorative practices or exactly why it fits, since we're kind of talking about it. It seems like that if that's a term of art that's used in a way that would be charged to certain people, I think we need to be very careful in using it. And because I have heard that term used a lot in the media without really understanding it myself, I just think we'd better be careful, because we may be using it in a way that we don't intend to be using it.
Mm-hmm. That's a valid point. I think we know that incidents in every school district occur, right? And sometimes they're microaggressions. Sometimes they're very slight comments that are peer-to-peer. Some people might call it just bullying or microaggression. And when those incidents occur, how do we as a community respond? And does the student feel like they're isolated? We know that when students feel isolated, then there's a lot of negative things that can occur as a result of that isolation. And this is one way to restore that relationship. And I think restorative justice is more related to law enforcement and larger penalties that might be associated with an infraction. We're talking about some things that are sometimes very minor or might appear very minor, but if it happens over and over again, can do significant damage to a student. And so, even like body shaming, which is something that happens with many teenagers, like, oh, you look like you're this, you look like you're that, you're overweight, you're skinny, or whatever the case is. How do we create spaces where students can actually say, I don't feel good about that? Or even better, how do peers intervene and say, that's not okay, that's not all right to do? We want to really empower students to be able to restore those relationships when something negative occurs, so that that student doesn't walk away feeling like justice wasn't done, or they feel bad because nobody really came to their aid. And we know that sometimes teachers may not hear about these things until after the fact. Some of this is taking place online in the digital sphere. We have a lot more digital or online bullying that's taking place. And sometimes it's very abrasive comments that are made related to race or identity that have an impact. Now, is it happening as much as maybe when we were kids? I don't know. I think it's important for us to address it either way, and give students the tools to be able to be part of that, so that they know that it's not okay. There's even things that happen at athletic events that things people say, or in passing in the hallway. It has an exponential impact on the wellness of that student over the course of their life and their academic career. How do we address that? And so some of it is really restoring dignity and humanity into that space, and giving teachers the tools to share with students, so that they kind of know, like, oh yeah, I'm responsible for that. That's what it means. And yeah, citizenship, you could call it that, but it also could mean a few other things that are part of that overall profile that you're looking to develop. Katsier?
So Dan, I think that that's a really good point. I think we should really look at and remember, and I know many of us have worked really hard to make sure that we have what we would call the La Cañada approach to this information that we can begin and continue to talk about to see how it fits. I think there's a great opportunities, but foundational to all is the building of relationships. And I think that that's really key for us. And I know we've talked a great deal. I know, Wendy, you've really wanted to make sure, and all sites have looked at making sure, or at least approaching, do we have our students being able to at least connect with one adult, just to make sure that there's really that belonging, that sense of belonging. So that's really important as well. So these are points that I'm writing down and for us to continue to talk about.
Yeah, I think, the sort of buckets of being proactive, being reactive, like those are the both require different training, like you say, classroom management. Joe, you mentioned, you know, how to sort of facilitate difficult conversations in the classroom, prior to them coming up and after they come up, and you know, like that sort of. So there's those two buckets, and I think there's a lot to figure out how we train, and also, you know, you're talking about, and you've mentioned it a bit, is like we've got two separate populations. We have a student population that is born into a different generation, responding in a different way, and we have a teacher, an administrator, and school board population that grew up in a very different environment. So the training for us is undoing some things that we maybe have grown to think of as norms that may not be norms anymore. And so I love when I look at what you're saying. It's like it's trying to figure out how that there's a lot to learn there, and there's a lot to learn in a lot of different ways. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And some of it we have to understand that as adults, there's fear and apprehension attached to this, right? There's a fear, like, what does this mean? For example, you know, I'll share my children are in a Mandarin immersion school, right? Both of them speak fluent Mandarin since kindergarten. And it's amazing. They come home and they're talking to each other, and I don't know what they're saying. I think they're trying to take my car. But I'm sharing that with you because I've opened that door to a new community and culture that I may not be 100% familiar with. I mean, I've been to China like 3 times, but that's not my culture. That's not necessarily something that I grew up with. There's a little bit of fear and apprehension about, oh, well, are my kids going to change culturally somehow because they've adopted these new skills? And how does it shape them as human beings? And so we have to be able to say, okay, you know what? I'm comfortable with the discomfort of this situation, and I'm going to monitor it, but I'm hopeful that it's good for my child to be able to be fluent in Mandarin. So, you know, some of these new skills aren't skills that we necessarily all adopted as kids. So it's unfamiliar to us. So part of educating a board or even parents is giving them room to be a little uncomfortable and saying, you know, it's going to be okay, and addressing their concerns in a way that, you know, doesn't escalate, right? So it's like, okay, well, tell me your questions. Let's have a civil discourse about what your fears are. I think it's just important to create those spaces, and through that, we're not going to get everybody on board, but you'll get a large number of people say, oh, okay, I understand. This is about developing good citizens or leaders, or however they choose to frame it in their own mind. Jamie is next, and then back to Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, just following up with something that Josh did that kind of sparked back to one of your slides. I think there is just such a sense of fear among any of the adults that are doing this work. I reflect back on when I was teaching and definite missteps I've made having new context and new understandings when teaching certain topics or getting questions from students. But I loved that slide on the syllabus that you had. And I think the 4th bullet point said something along the lines like, I'm still in the learning process. I'm going to make mistakes. If I do, please let me know. Please talk to me. If you hear something like that, that was wonderful. And I feel like that's such a nice way to give people the grace that's needed when we do this work, that it declares that I'm a learner. I'm going to do the best that I can, but I'm open to getting help or making corrections. I really like that.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. Yeah, I also can go back to a slide and also something about what Josh was talking about, and that is about the process. I think one of your slides said something along the lines about helping faculty to unlearn what they know. And I personally am fine with unlearning because I know I've learned things incorrectly, and I know that it's, you know, that I grew up in a different era and all that kind of stuff. So I have absolutely no offense to that at all. But I'm concerned whether or not we might have teachers or faculty members who would take offense to that, who feel like they, and maybe this answers its own question, they know everything there is to know, so they don't need to unlearn anything. But how do you address that? How do you address yes, you may think you know everything you need to know, but here's more that would be good to learn?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, whenever I do any type of diversity related workshop, I encourage people to to go on a journey of reflection and think about all the influencers since they were young that have impacted how they view the world. What has their diversity journey been like? What is their diversity bio? Because we all have different encounters with difference along the way in our lives, some in our own families, some at work or in, in sports teams or whatever it might be, that have influenced how we view the world. And then to reflect on that, how much, how different are we as human beings, as adults, compared to when we were younger, and what are some of the things, what are the lessons that we learned then that have changed and influenced what we believe to be true now? I think there's some soul searching that goes into that process, and I try to create spaces, even when I'm doing like executive training, can you share your diversity story with people? Have you even thought about what your diversity story is? And some of the impactful moments, positive or negative, and how it shaped how you view the world. And ultimately, how does that shape you as an educator? It's very easy for some people to look at some people who are different from them and say, okay, well, that person's at risk, versus thinking of them as at promise, because every student has a promising future. And how do we create that versus kind of writing them off and saying, nope, that kid isn't going in the direction that we want him to go in? Because that's all about our own personal bias. And so reflecting on your own bias and understanding we all have bias is a great place to start, because if you're open to that, you can be open to understanding that, yeah, there's some things that I could probably unlearn, so that when you're teaching, you're not making the same mistakes. So it requires some soul searching. And I think the other thing is, we as partners in this journey have to be patient with our colleagues or peers. We're not all starting from the same place. We don't all have the same lived experiences. So why should we expect people to just be on board and catch up right away? We have to create a space where we can be patient and understand that, okay, this is a lifelong learning process. And I learn new things about diversity, equity, and inclusion all the time. Moving to San Diego from New Jersey, I learned so much about student veterans in the military that I never knew, because there's multiple military bases in San Diego. And so that was a great learning opportunity for me. I had to unlearn what I thought about the military. And that was very enriching for me, but I had to be open to that. I couldn't just say, oh, I know the military. I know who's in the military and why they went in the military. I had to actually unlearn that. So that's just one example from my own experiences where, yeah, and I had to relearn and unlearn what I thought about military service and what that means. So thank you for asking the question, Dan. Other comments or questions? Wendy?
I think that Dan, to your point, that idea of unlearning and that being threatening is pretty powerful. And I think that's why trainings like this are so important, to have the conversations where people recognize that, it is a journey, and we all have, generationally, we've all been born in different places, especially when you look at, where our kids are and, where, the age of our parents for, most of them. And then sometimes, people at the other ends of their careers. And I think it's just that understanding that we are going to make mistakes, and that, sometimes that the fear keeps you from trying. And if we all sort of have that group acceptance that, if you're open and you're trying and you're acknowledging a mistake or you're acknowledging a success, that it really is about, relationships and about community. And it's, helping people to accept where they are and to commit to growing and going forward. And I think that level of understanding and empathy is just so critical. And I think that's such a strong learning from a session like this, because we're all in different places, and we're all going to grow at, a different rate and pace.
That's a really good point, Wendy. It's interesting because, we all, spend time with our families at home, and we have conversations even over the holidays, and you learn so much about, the philosophical perspectives of your kids and what they believe to be true in the world. And, we just passed Thanksgiving, and my oldest daughter, she says, no, I'm, that's the day of mourning. And I'm like, well, can we have turkey? And she's like, well, no, and I'm thinking, like, I didn't, even though I'm the diversity, I didn't talk to her about the day of mourning. We've never had that conversation as a family about a day of mourning, but she picked that information up from somewhere. It was either her class or her classmates, or in between classes, she learned this material about the day of mourning. And I realized that, yeah, she's seeing the world very differently than I was, because I was just thinking, all right, we're going to get together as a family and have a nice meal. And it's not going to be any drama associated with it. But I realized that because they're seeing the world in a different way, can we as parents give ourselves permission to learn alongside them about a variety of different topics and have rich conversations that might shed light on subjects for me and shed light on subjects for them as well, without imposing my complete ideology on top of them, because that's what we want to do. We try to make mini me's, right? We're like, I want you to believe and do exactly what I did and go into the world and do it the way their relationships with people are so different. I mean, my relationships with people, were never like texted, right? That's a relationship in itself, but I never had relationships with people on the other side of the planet either. They have friends in China. So I'm like, how do you have friends in China? She's like, oh, they visited the school one day and we talk, or we do Zoom, or I'm like, okay, it's a different planet that they're inheriting from us. And I think there's something to be said for us being the student as well as being the teachers. It's a little scary when I, hand over a course to a student, but sometimes those are the most enriching experiences for me as an educator. I'm like, wow, you've learned so much. And that's one of the things I do with some of the teams that I work with. I said, well, okay, you've learned from me. What if I said, okay, here's your homework assignment. Come back, work in small groups of 3, and then come back to the next meeting and share something interesting that you've learned about diversity that was eye-opening for you. And what does that mean? And I've learned so much from my colleagues and folks that I've worked with, because I give them a space to say, you know what, I know you think I'm this expert, but you also have expertise that's valuable in this journey. What does it mean to be a champion in this work? And share with your peers what you've learned. And really, that's an important invitation to give to yourself. They say, you know what, yeah, I'm gonna go learn something new. And then I'm going to come back and share it with my family or my friends or my colleagues about this amazing world we live in. And it could be like, you know what? I never knew what Diwali was, but I did some research on it and I'm really interested in Diwali. I never knew, or whatever the topic might be. It could be, what is a brave space? What does it mean to create a brave space in a school? And how is that different from a safe space? I mean, there's so many different aspects of this. What does it mean to have mobility challenged students on your campus? There's so many different things that we don't see because we don't see the world through that lens. And that includes gender, right? I mean, there's so many different things. So we have to be, as parents, and knowing that our kids have access to so much more information than we ever did, and they have time to access that information now, we have to kind of catch up and figure out, okay, what are they learning? What are they learning? And just understand that, no, we're always going to learn new things. And I know we want to be in that role of the leader, but it also means that we have to be humble enough to know that, yeah, we don't have all the answers. And that happens with my cell phone all the time. If I don't understand something about my cell phone, maybe some of you have been in this situation, I just go to one of my children and I say, can you figure this out? And they're like, oh yeah, bip, bip, bip. They press a few buttons and then it's done. Ask your children about pronouns. I'm like, how do you know that? I was like, I know pronouns and this is what it is. And one of my friends likes this pronoun. I'm like, okay, you're in 8th grade and you know all this about pronouns? Like, yep. And my friends use these pronouns and it's okay. I'm like, oh, all right. I didn't know that they were learning some of these things, but they're teaching me things. I hope this is valuable to you. It's so important that you're spending time with these conversations. It really makes a huge impact on the lives of so many students and also faculty in ways that you can't even imagine. What we're doing is we're planting the seed of possibility for the future. And it really does pay off. It's an amazing investment. I can share with you an investment that my parents made in me. And as we approach the holiday season, my parents decided when I was young, I have a younger brother, he's about 4 years younger than me. He decided, my father and my mother decided that they weren't going to buy a bunch of presents for the holidays. We weren't going to have a bunch of Christmas presents under the tree. And I said, well, why not? Well, no, that's just not what we're going to do this year. The toys get broken, you outgrow the clothes, and it's really not any fun for your mom and I to clean up all this wrapping paper and everything else all over the place. And they said, you can get one toy and you can get a plane ticket. And I was a little upset about it. I'm like, because all my friends had all these toys. And it's like, nope. But it was the best investment my parents ever made in my future. And I've traveled the entire world as a result. And that's a gift that kind of keeps on giving, because now I have a partner who speaks fluent Russian and Swahili. And I have 2 kids who are doing this Mandarin journey. And I do the same thing with them. It's like, you can get one present and a plane ticket, because I realize that to know difference in the world is such a precious gift. And to be able to explore and give them permission to understand that difference has an amazing benefit, not only to you, but to the world, to be able to have that experience. So thank you so much for your time together. I'm really excited about this journey, and just know that you have a friend here. And if there's anything I can do, or you'd like to continue this dialogue, one-on-one or at any point in time, by all means, let Wendy know, and we'll try to make that happen.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you, Dr. Bruce. We very much appreciate it. I know Kaiser may have lost connection with us, and she asked me if I did to thank you and appreciate you being here today, and also the other sessions you're doing for our district. We very much appreciate it. And since Kaiser's not responding, I guess we should move on our agenda to item 4B, and that would be approval of the guardrail project at Lockingham High School. Mark, I think that's yours. I'm trying to pull up the agenda, but I can't get it while I've got the screen on.
Dr. Bruce, we'll see you.
Hi, Dr. Bruce.
Thank you, Dr. Bruce.
Thank you. I think Nairi's going to bring Harold over to join us as well. The bid for the high school decking and railing project went out. At our last board meeting, we had approved the withdrawal of the low bidder due to an error in their bid. So Abney General Contractors are going to be the ones who will be awarded the bid. This is to redo the decking on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the A and B buildings, as well as the railings, and bring them up to current codes. And Abney's bid was $1,440,000. Abney is a company that we've actually worked with several times now in the bond project. They did the lunch shelter at PCY, and they're currently working on the new construction at PCR. Harold, did I leave anything else out? That you're on mute.
On mute?
Yeah.
No, you didn't. I just wanted to add that at the last board meeting, the board did take action to allow the lowest bidder to withdraw its bid due to mathematical error. And this item did not make it to the board agenda. So to the last board agenda, that's why it's separate from the previous item.
Oh, Kaitu's back. So to begin discussion, do we have a motion to approve the bid for the guardrail improvements?
I'll make a motion.
Josh, motion. Do we have a second? Thank you, Joe. Discussion, any questions, comments? I think the comment I would make, and I know it came up a couple of times, is I was interested in seeing what we could do to improve the safety of the guardrails. And I appreciate what you've all done looking into it to see what might be a possibility. It doesn't appear that there's anything immediate that we can do in a reasonable way as a part of this project to improve the safety of the railings or other things. But I think it sounds like from what Mark had said at our last meeting, the way we would probably want to approach it is a change order to the bid or a separate bid if there's something that we can do in the future. So I think that's answered my question. I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we'd want to move forward with this. One of the concerns is just getting the decking done, the spalling and the exposure of the rebar is important to get addressed. And if we wanted to kind of change the railing at a future date, that would be a different conversation, I think.
Yeah, and I thought there might be some benefit of doing the whole project at the same time, but after the architects have taken a quick look at it, it does appear it would make more sense to do it as a separate project.
I know we've done this. It's sort of been piecemeal how we've done this, but the just to be clear, this is just the A and the B buildings in the high school, correct? That's what we're talking about here.
Yes, I can think of the A building, the B building, and the decking joining them, correct? And does it go over to the choir building as well?
It does go over to the choir building. The overpass to the choir building, get the new deck coating, because you could see there's some deterioration of the concrete in that area. We're also upgrading the handrails for the stairs, as well as the guardrail enclosure on the face of the building.
So it's just not the 7-8. The 7-8 building is excluded from this project.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I think, Josh, if you've seen it, and the reason I think it's kind of an urgent project is that if you look at the decking, there are places where you can see the rebar is rusting through and is becoming a place where the water pools when it rains, and it's getting close, if it isn't already, to be a tripping hazard.
And Harold's been explaining that structurally, it's really, we need to address it because we've done some repairs and, taken care of it over time, but you just don't want the integrity of the materials to be exposed or damaged. And so this is an optimal time, and I just appreciate the board taking action on this at the special meeting.
Yeah, and along with escalation costs too, making sure we contain costs because everything's going up so fast. So I think we have line of sight to a firm bid. Let's go for it.
Will this construction begin then while classes are still in session, or will this wait until the summer?
Okay, Harold, we're planning on the summer, correct?
The bulk of the work will get done over the summer. But we are looking to do some of the repair work, the deck repair, concrete repair, during the spring break. So that is something we're looking at. The reason we're doing that is so that the summer session is so short, or the summer break is so short that anything we could get done prior to that summer break, I think it's just going to help the schedule. So we're going to be looking at trying to get some of the repair work done over the spring break.
And we also want a lot of lead time for all of the wrought iron work and the railings as well, to give lead time to get that produced and sent to us in a timely manner for summer.
Yes.
Thank you, Dan, for taking over while I'm trying to fix my internet here. So if I don't have any other discussion, we have a motion and a second. Are we ready to call the vote? Okay, let's move on and see if I can get an acceptance of the bid. All in favor? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Harold. And we look forward to moving forward, literally, so that we can make the repairs and continue on with our projects. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to moving on to consent agenda next. Do I have a motion to approve consent agenda and a second? Joe, I've got a motion. Do I have a second? Josh, I've got a second. All in favor? We're set 4-0 at this point. Thank you so much. And we are at the end of our meeting. Since this is a special meeting, we don't have communication. I want to thank everyone for their time. And I want to thank Dr. Bruce for his presentation. Lots of good conversation in the beginnings. And we will continue our conversations. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week. And we'll see you all next Tuesday at our governing board meeting. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you all. Stay safe and be well.
All right.